When the music played again, it was different. It carried her name in its rhythm. The gala would be remembered not for the glamour or the wealth, but for the woman who turned shame into triumph in front of everyone. Amara smiled, knowing her story was only just beginning. Bustias. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye. Adago's eyes filled with tears as she finished. She whispered, "Everything you see now, every comfort you take for granted, was built on sacrifices I never spoke about." Chimamanda sat frozen, her chest rising with heavy breaths. Slowly, tears rolled down her cheeks. She moved closer, wrapping her arms tightly around her grandmother, finally realizing that the woman she once thought old-fashioned was the true reason their family stood strong. The silence filled the room as Adago sat still, her hands resting gently on her knees. Hurt sank deep inside her chest, but her face stayed calm as she watched her granddaughter storm out. She wanted to cry, but her tears refused to fall. The words stung, yet she swallowed the pain because she knew anger would not heal anything. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, remembering how many times life had spoken to her in harsher tones than her granddaughter's sharp voice. The room felt heavy, the air almost too thick to breathe, but Adago stayed quiet, carrying her sadness alone. Later that evening, when the house grew dark and shadows stretched across the walls, Adago lit a small lamp. She knew she could not let the night end without speaking the truth she had hidden for years. She called Chimamanda back, her voice steady but full of meaning. "Come here," she said softly. "I need to tell you something you don't know." The young girl hesitated but returned, curiosity shining in her eyes. Adago looked at her, a mix of sorrow and strength in her expression. "You think I don't understand your struggles, but you don't know what I carried when I was your age," she began. Her voice shook slightly, but her words carried power. She spoke of her youth in Owerri, a time when dreams were crushed by poverty and betrayal. She recalled how she once loved Obiora, a man who promised her happiness, but abandoned her when his family called her unworthy. Her story grew heavier as she told of raising her daughter alone, with no one to help, working endlessly just to put food on the table. People whispered behind her back, laughing at her broken heart, yet she walked through it all with her head held high. One day, when school fees threatened to end her daughter's education, she sold the only piece of jewelry her mother had left her. That single sacrifice saved a future, but left her empty-handed. Then came an unexpected blessing. A distant uncle left her land, and from that land she built something strong. That soil gave rise to the life they now enjoyed, the very home they lived in, the comfort surrounding them. Adago's voice grew softer as she whispered, "All of this came from pain you never saw." Chimamanda's eyes welled with tears, her heart breaking with guilt and love. She rushed forward and hugged her grandmother tightly, finally seeing the strength hidden behind her silence. The decision came to Adago when the night grew quiet, and the sound of the crickets outside filled the air. She could not let her granddaughter's words rest in her heart without showing her the truth. Later that evening, she sat in the dim light of the small lamp, her face calm but filled with something heavy. She called out, her voice steady, "Chimamanda, come back here." The young girl walked in slowly, her eyes still carrying pride, but there was also curiosity in her steps. Adago pointed to the chair in front of her and said, "You think I don't understand your struggles? Sit down. There is something I have kept locked inside me for 50 years. Chimamanda frowned, wondering what secret her grandmother could be hiding. She leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, waiting. Adago took a deep breath, her gaze fixed far away as though her mind was stepping back into another lifetime. Her voice grew softer, but carried a weight that could not be ignored. "When I was young, I thought I had everything figured out too. I believed love would save me. I believed hard work alone would be enough. But life taught me differently." Her words pulled Chimamanda closer without her realizing it. Adago continued, telling her how she once fell deeply in love with a man named Obiora, a man she thought would stay forever. But his family looked at her with disdain, whispering that she was too poor, unworthy of their son. She recalled the day he walked away, leaving her heart shattered and her dreams crushed. Chimamanda shifted uneasily, suddenly realizing her grandmother's quiet strength had been shaped by wounds she had never seen. Adago's eyes glistened as she spoke of raising a child alone, fighting every single day just to survive. She shared how the world mocked her, how she worked endless hours, carrying loads on her back, selling whatever she could to keep her daughter alive. She paused, her hands trembling as she admitted selling her mother's precious heirloom. The only reminder of her past, just to pay for school fees. That moment, a doggo said, broke her, but it also built the future. The room grew heavier as her story flowed. Chimamanda sat frozen, no longer angry, her eyes wide with emotion. She began to see her grandmother not as someone old-fashioned, but as a woman who had walked through fire and survived. And for the first time, she wanted to hear every word that was still hidden in her story. The past begins as a doggo leaned back in her chair, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry the weight of memory. She told Chimamanda about her youth in Owerri, a time when she was full of dreams but life tested her with pain she never expected. She described dusty streets, small markets, and nights when she went to bed hungry, yet her heart still carried hope. She spoke of betrayal that cut deeper than hunger, of promises broken and humiliation that left scars she could never forget. She told her how she once believed in love with all her heart. Obiora, the man she trusted, had looked at her as though she was his entire world, but that world shattered when his family rejected her. They told him she was too poor, not good enough to stand beside their son. With shame burning in her soul, she watched him walk away, leaving her alone with tears that soaked her pillow for weeks. She thought the pain would end her, but instead, it forced her to find strength she didn't know she had. Adago's voice softened as she spoke of the struggles that followed. She had no husband, no wealth, and no family to shield her from harsh whispers. She became the girl everyone mocked in the village, the one people pitied or insulted in the same breath. Still, she refused to break. She carried loads on her head under the hot sun, sold fruits in the market, washed clothes for others, and took every small job she could find just to survive. Nights were lonely, and mornings came with fear of how she would feed her child. But she pressed on because giving up was never an option. She recalled moments when humiliation struck her hardest, when women in the village laughed at her torn wrapper, when neighbors said her daughter would never make it because her mother had nothing. Yet she kept walking, holding her little girl's hand, refusing to let shame define them. Each sacrifice, each long day of labor, built a strength that no insult could destroy. As she spoke, her eyes glistened with tears, but her voice carried pride. She told Chimamanda that the struggles of Owerri shaped her into the woman she became. A woman who turned pain into survival and survival into legacy. The silence in the room grew heavy, and Chimamanda sat still, her heart breaking as she realized she had never truly known the depth of her grandmother's story. The Forbidden Love was a story. Adago spoke with a trembling heart, her eyes staring into a past that never left her. She told Chimamanda about Obiora, the man she once believed was her forever. He had a smile that made her world brighter, and words that promised her a life of happiness. They would meet under the mango tree after long days, sharing secrets and dreams, whispering plans for a future they thought no one could break. She gave him her whole heart, believing love would be enough to fight against the world. But the world was not kind. Obiora's family saw her not as a woman worthy of their son, but as a burden who carried nothing but poverty on her shoulders. They told him she was too poor, not good enough to step into their home. They looked at her with eyes full of judgment, as if her dreams and her love meant nothing. She recalled the day Obiora stood before her, torn between his heart and his family's voice. She begged him to fight for them, to hold on to the love they shared, but in the end he walked away. The memory of that moment burned into her soul. She remembered how her knees gave way, how she sat in the dust, watching the man who promised her forever disappear into the distance without looking back. She felt humiliation wrap around her like chains, and the whispers of the villagers cut deeper than knives. They said, what did she expect? Love cannot feed the hungry. Adago carried the shame alone, burying her tears where no one could see. Yet even as her heart shattered, life gave her another battle, raising her child alone. Obiora's absence forced her to choose strength over sorrow. She worked while her daughter slept, she smiled when her heart was breaking, and she kept moving when her legs felt too heavy to walk. The betrayal became a wound that never healed, but it also became the fire that pushed her forward. As Adago's words filled the room, Chimamanda listened with tears in her eyes. She could see that her grandmother's silence was not weakness. It was strength built on heartbreak. That forbidden love, once her greatest joy and deepest pain, became the hidden foundation of the courage that kept their family alive. The struggle became the center of Adago's story, and her voice grew heavy as she spoke. She told Chimamanda how, after Obiora walked away, she was left alone with a baby in her arms and no one to help. She had no husband to provide, no family to stand beside her, and no savings to depend on. Every single day was a fight for survival. She worked from sunrise until late into the night, taking any job she could find. She carried baskets of yams to the market, washed clothes for wealthier families, cleaned houses, and even worked on farms just to earn enough to buy food. Her hands were always tired, her feet always sore, but she refused to stop. She remembered times when her little girl cried out for food, and she had nothing to give but water and songs to calm her. She would rock her to sleep with tears streaming down her face, whispering promises that one day things would be better. The neighbors often mocked her, some saying she had cursed her own life by trusting a man who abandoned her. Others laughed that her daughter would never rise above poverty, because she came from nothing. Every word cut into her, but she turned those words into fuel, a fire that made her work harder. She told Chimamanda that shame followed her everywhere she went. When she walked through the village in torn wrappers, people looked at her with pity or scorn. When she tried to sell goods in the market, some buyers mocked her prices, saying she was desperate. Yet she held her head high, pretending their words did not pierce her, because she knew her daughter's future depended on her strength. Adago recalled the endless days she spent balancing heavy trays on her head, the sun beating down on her, her child tied to her back with a wrapper. She pushed through sickness, exhaustion, and hunger, because stopping meant failure, and failure was something she could never allow. She wanted her daughter to have what she never had, an education, dignity, and a chance to live without shame. As she spoke, her eyes glistened, but her voice carried pride. She told Chimamanda that every sacrifice she made, every insult she endured, and every job she took built the path that allowed their family to stand where they were today. She never gave up, not once, because love gave her the courage to fight through the darkest nights. The hidden sacrifice came when Adago's daughter was ready to move to the next level of school, but the fees were higher than anything she had ever faced. She worked day and night, taking extra jobs, but no matter how hard she pushed herself, the money was never enough. She remembered sitting in the small corner of her room, staring at her daughter's books, her heart breaking because she feared her little girl's future would be cut short. That night, she opened the wooden box she had kept hidden for years. Inside lay the only piece of jewelry she owned, her mother's heirloom. It was a necklace passed down to her with love, the last memory of the woman who raised her. Her fingers trembled as she held it, because it was not just gold, it was history, it was love, it was the one thing she thought she would never part with. But as she looked at her daughter sleeping peacefully, she knew she had no choice. The next morning, she carried it to the market, her steps heavy as if each one pulled her further from her mother's memory. She walked into the jeweler's shop, placed it on the table, and forced herself not to cry as she whispered, "How much will you give me?" The man looked at the necklace, admired its beauty, and gave her the money. It was enough to cover the fees, but in that moment, she felt like a part of her heart had been sold too. She walked out with the coins clutched tightly in her palm, the weight of both relief and sorrow pressing down on her. That evening, she paid the school and watched her daughter run happily into the classroom the next day, unaware of the price that had been paid for her education. Adago kept that pain buried, never telling anyone what she had given up. People thought she was just hardworking, but they never saw the sacrifices hidden behind her strength. She told Chimamanda that even though she lost the only treasure her mother left her, she never regretted it, because her child's future mattered more than anything she owned. As the story poured out, Chimamanda's eyes filled with tears. She realized that the comfort she lived in now was built on a sacrifice, so deep it could never be repaid. The hidden truth showed her that her grandmother's love was not spoken in words, but written in the choices that cost her everything. The turning point came years later, long after Adago had learned to carry pain like a shadow. She had grown used to the endless struggle of working with her hands, living each day with just enough to survive. But then one morning, a messenger arrived with news that changed everything. A distant uncle, a man she barely knew but who had always watched her quietly, had passed away. In his will, he left her a piece of land on the outskirts of Owerri. At first she thought it was a mistake. She was the poor woman no one believed in, the one mocked in the market, Yet here was a gift that carried hope. She remembered walking to see the land for the first time, her daughter's small hand in hers. The soil stretched wide, wild and untouched, but to her eyes, it was more than dirt. It was possibility. She worked with all the strength she had left, clearing it, planting crops, and slowly turning it into something that could feed not just her family but others too. The farm grew, and with it her courage. What once seemed like a small inheritance became the root of a new life. The land gave her more than food. It gave her dignity. She began to sell her harvest, and for the first time, people in the village who had once mocked her came to buy from her. She saved what she could, invested carefully, and little by little, her name changed from the abandoned woman to the woman who built her own. That soil became the foundation of the house they would later live in. The house that Chimamanda now walked through without realizing the story behind its walls. Adago told her granddaughter that it wasn't luck alone that changed her fate. It was the years of silent sacrifice that prepared her to use the gift wisely. Without the strength she built through suffering, the land would have been wasted. Instead, she nurtured it until it gave her family a future she once thought impossible. Her eyes softened as she said, "That turning point was not just for me. It was for all of you." That land became the beginning of the legacy we live in today. Chimamanda sat frozen, realizing that their comfort, their wealth, their security all began with one unexpected blessing, and a grandmother who refused to waste it. The big reveal came when Adago's voice grew softer, but her words carried the weight of truth that had been buried for years. She looked straight at Chimamanda and finally admitted what no one in the family truly knew. She said that the wealth they enjoyed, the house they lived in, and the security they took for granted did not come from luck or easy beginnings. It all existed because of sacrifices she made in silence, sacrifices no one ever saw. Her story, hidden for decades, was the foundation of everything around them. She told her granddaughter that every brick in the walls of their home, every meal they ate in comfort, and every smile they shared without worry was built on nights of hunger, mornings of hard labor, and choices that broke her heart. She explained how selling her mother's heirloom necklace, working countless jobs, and living with shame became the stepping stones to the life her family now lived proudly. She confessed that even the land that changed their story had only flourished because she refused to give up when life pushed her down. Adago's eyes glistened with tears as she spoke, but there was also pride shining in them. She said, "You see this house? You see this life? None of it would be here if I had stopped, if I had chosen to let pain destroy me. I gave up everything, not for myself, but so my daughter and her children would never know the same suffering." Her voice broke, and for a moment, silence filled the room, heavier than any words. Chimamanda's lips parted in shock as she realized the truth. The clothes she wore, the school she attended, the comfort she had always believed was simply her right, all of it had been carved out of her grandmother's hidden battles. She saw that her grandmother's strength was the reason her own life felt easy. Adago leaned forward and whispered, "We stand where we are today because of tears I never showed, because of choices no one saw." That confession struck Chimamanda's heart like thunder. She could no longer see her grandmother as just old-fashioned. She finally understood that Adago was the root, the protector, and the reason their family stood strong. The revelation changed everything, leaving Chimamanda in awe of the woman she had once dismissed. The lesson learned came in a moment that Chimamanda would never forget. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed into her grandmother's arms, holding her tightly as if she never wanted to let go. The words she once shouted now felt like knives in her chest. She realized she had been blind to the truth, blind to the sacrifices that built the very life she lived so comfortably. As she pressed her face against Adago's shoulder, she whispered apologies, saying she never knew the depth of her grandmother's strength. Adago's embrace was gentle, her wrinkled hands stroking her granddaughter's back. She did not scold her or remind her of the pain her words caused earlier. Instead, she smiled softly and said, "Now you understand. I was never against you. Everything I did, every battle I fought, was so you could have a better life." Her voice carried both sorrow and joy, for she had carried her story in silence for half a century, and at last it had been heard. Chimamanda pulled back slightly, her eyes shining with both guilt and admiration. She saw her grandmother not as someone trapped in the past, but as the very foundation of their present. The old woman who had been mocked as out of touch was the reason they had a roof over their heads, the reason they had wealth, and the reason their family stood respected. The girl finally understood that her grandmother's silence was not weakness. It was power hidden in patience. She cried harder, holding her grandmother's hands, promising never again to take her sacrifices for granted. Adago's heart swelled with relief. She had waited for years to share her truth, and now it had changed the bond between them forever. The room that once carried tension now felt full of love, understanding, and respect. Chimamanda whispered, "You are not just my grandmother. You are the root of everything we are." And with those words, the gap between generations closed. Adago smiled through her tears, knowing her story had finally given her granddaughter the lesson she needed. Hi, Besties Red Heart, thank you so much for staying with me till the end of this touching story. Cherry Blossom, please don't forget to like, thumbs up, drop a comment, speech balloon, and subscribe bell for more emotional and powerful stories. Bye for now. Sparkles.